If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking
die
about
for.
tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unborn, and those who are the
How
ancestors.
long is your list?
So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self.
Panther 48.
What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us
Willing to die for.
that we don't have the
How
right
long is your
to
list?
claim independence.
Panther 48.
So, again, today's discussion, affirmations and proclivities of disparity. Did everybody see that? This one person acknowledge at least.
I can
Yeah,
see
we
it.
see it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to deal with, second here. Let's start by getting proclivities and disparities explained here. So proclivity, natural or habitual inclination or tendency, predisposition. And the reason why that's important is because oftentimes we're driven to think a certain way, or we're and it's typically subconscious, and quite often we don't recognize that this is what is happening to us. So when you have a predisposition to operate a way other than how you should operate, but not be fully conscious of it, it is going to control how you view the world, which goes into the concept of the disparity, lack of similarity or equality, which is inequality. And addressing that, dealing with proclivities of disparity, which a lot of people may not necessarily be familiar with those two words coming right together, which is important. Because again, the idea here is to raise our consciousness and to make us aware, especially of the power of language. And at the end, one of the some of the references that we have in this document will give you more insight into that. And I do want to say this before I move forward anymore for everyone on here. If you don't already have a copy of the document being shared, throw your email in the chat, and when I get around to it, I will send you a copy of the document, because I think it's important that everyone reviews this and just use it as much as possible in terms of just empowering yourself. So dealing with proclivity and disparity pulled together, what you have to recognize is it sits on the aspect of population or people being victimized and embedding themselves in that mentality of victimization. And when we do that as a people, it actually causes us to automatically fall back on certain levels of individuality as a trend. So as we're broken collectively, we tend to empower ourselves individually. And that is an intentional design in terms of what you want to do for a population, especially as a population increases. Because the last thing you want is for that increased population is to utilize that increase as a power base. And so in order to do that, you tend to calibrate that population to think more like individuals and to not get the bigger picture, not be able to see things from that perspective. So a lot of the hidden operations, and especially in terms of how we visually and sonically digest data that comes about our way, is based on being able to use these channels to draw us into that point of view and that perspective. So proclivity is a very in-depth weapon. And in saying that, not all definitions are functional, and that's important that we recognize that. Often a definition is asserted and weaponized to remove self-actualization. And by doing that, what we deal with, and we talk about this within our Panther training, it goes into not knowing that your freedom of choice has been removed from you. So we will deal with some affirmations that kind of just go into that. So one thing we want to address as it applies to that is, as taught in the Gospel of Hip Hop, we will use what's referred to as repetition, which is to redefine or redefine a definition, which is done in order to undo the reversal of intelligence, aka the attack brought about by the government with the aims of countering our intelligence and consciousness. We must heal and properly preserve the vessel and temple of knowledge in order to empower the people and bring back strength and the appetite for consistent, collective, synchronized, direct action through people power. Let me say that last one again: consistent, collective, synchronized, direct action. And what that gets into is how the people are able to operate and utilize their collective power across the board. And it must be exactly like that. It must be consistent. It obviously has to be collective when we're talking about the masses, and it needs to be synchronized, because otherwise what you are looking at that point is little spurts, riots, and skirmishes. And then we want to be operating on the level of direct action, as opposed to just, whining, complaining, and not actually doing anything about what we see taking place. We build bonds respectively in our diversity in order to defeat imperialism and not let division remain the implosive, and that's important that we recognize it's an implosive go-to weapon of choice that recalibrates generation against generation and gender against gender. The politics of identity cannot continue to be so easily deployed and readily available to keep us operating on a level of selfish individualism. And so when we talk about combating proclivities of disparity, it's important that we recognize this. And I think in one of the chats earlier, someone threw up a definition in terms of dealing with affirmations. And it was important. I'm glad that happened, because what we learned is specifically within the Panther ranks is how definitions tend to be played, again, like we stated earlier, weaponized and asserted and used against us. Within the Panther framework, when we get into what we call our local objectives, we have something called the 3Ds. The 3Ds is to define, develop, and then defend. And when, as a people, when we organize, when we move to consistent, collective, synchronized, direct action, it is important that we define who we are. We define our objective. We define our reality. We define our power base, as opposed of accepting what has been provided to you. And so you have to be able to consciously go against the grain in terms of what has been considered to be the norm. Because just because something is the norm, or even just because somebody is more smarter than you, don't necessarily make them more righter than you. And so we have to be able to recognize this. And so the element of affirmations, as it applies to that, goes in to help combat the psychological damage that continually is being bombarded upon us on a daily basis, to keep us in a negative operation, or to keep us in a dysfunctional state, or to keep us in a position, like we stated here, that has us operating on selfish individualism, or have us operating, again, where generations are against generations, or genders against gender. But the point here is to not allow the system to continue to have it, for the system to so easily divide us as a people, easily disarm us in terms of our consciousness. A lot of times when people think about COINTELPRO from a historical standpoint, they really look at it as simply just an attack that was done on select groups or select individuals, not recognizing that there's two elements to counterintelligence. The counterintelligence element has to do with a specific targeting of groups or individuals that are attempting to raise the consciousness of the people. The flip side of that is counter consciousness. Counter consciousness operations are basically targeting the dumbing down and the disconnect of the general body or the masses of the people from connecting with those people of a certain caliber that are attempting to rise up and create revolution, or to create a higher level of consciousness and a higher level of operation by the masses of people. So you see what happens with that is that you're getting hit from both sides. And when they do that to us and we're not aware of it, any weapon that is formed against you that you're not aware of as being a weapon, which is why I talked about specifically use the word implode, is a very effective weapon. Because if you don't know you're being attacked, then you won't form a defense. And from a psychological standpoint, if you are not forming the proper defense, what happens is it pierces right past any defense, quote unquote, defenses that you think you have. Because when you think you're being basically attacked from a physical level and they're hitting you from a psychological level, or you think you got that covered and they're hitting you from an economic level, or they're hitting you from by just really over inundating you with data, over inundating you with so much different things that can create levels of distraction. That distraction done on a daily basis, which is doped again on a population 24/7, 7 days a week. When we simply just take a little bit of time out of our lives and maybe read or maybe try to study, but we're not doing it enough to offset the bombardment of all of this function that we're being imploded with, and we don't recognize how at certain times we do need to separate ourselves from these networks, from these things that tie us into that collective unconscious body of being able to be attacked. Then what happens from that standpoint is over time, and I'm talking about from the point of dealing with a child moving into an adult, what it does is it literally damages your neural network in terms of being able to have what's referred to as critical thinking and critical consciousness. Not just critical thinking, but critical thinking and critical consciousness. We have to recognize polarities, and we have to recognize dualities, should I say, in a lot of the things that are taking place in the world. And within the Panther Party, we also get into what we call the trifactors from that standpoint. And as we address that as a people, we have to recognize that when we talk about family or family unit being in the center, on the left is the individual, on the right is the community. So that trifactor is held together in terms of a bond by the family unit. The family unit must connect from both ends. Too often when we think we're raising our children, we're doing it from the standpoint of simply just blood relatives, and having that mentality, not recognizing that, again, the collective synchronization as it applies to community empowerment that must take place. If we have the mentality, if we have the perspective that it is an elective, or it is something that I don't have to do, but I choose to do from time to time, and by doing so, I simply have a feel-good moment because I've done something good for somebody today, as opposed to recognizing that, no, you have an accountability to do something good for other people every day. It is not something that you should pat yourself on the back for and use as a wedge or an ego trip to compare yourself to somebody that is possibly not doing as much as you do. But to be servants of the people, servants of the community, mean that you recognize that you have that obligation. And that is what's very important for us to see. And so in addressing affirmations, we recognize that. Any questions before I move on, or comments anybody want to make?
No comments at this moment. I'm loving all the information you're giving us. Very informative and what we need to know.
Thank you, sir. All right, next page here. So now let's talk about functional definition of an affirmation. Affirmations are proven methods of self-improvement because of their ability to rewire our brains. Much like exercise, they raise the level of feel-good hormones and push our brain to form new clusters of positive thought neurons, which goes back to combating what we started, which was deal with the proclivities of disparity. So it is very important that we rewire our way of thinking. If you accept the phrase, you are what you think, then life truly stems from your thoughts, but you cannot rely on just your thoughts. We must write down our thoughts and review the words and lead ourselves to put them into actions in order to manifest our intentions. Our perceptions of ourselves tend to direct our views on others. So when that happens, the perception is deflective, and we will abate in dysfunction and resort to individualism and survivalism and victimization. And now these things here, going into what we talked about, what I mentioned earlier in terms of a trifactor, I want you to take those last three words: individualism, survivalism, victimization. It's combined like that for a reason, because what you have to recognize is, again, going into how things are weaponized and used against us. Oftentimes, when our thought process is seeded with certain things, and we even use this in one of the affirmations later, when something is seeded, if you look at it just from, let's just talk about the standpoint of dealing with something like in nature, from soil. Once that seed is planted, people that are walking on what we call topsoil are not aware of what's beneath their feet. And when you're not aware of what's beneath your feet, then you don't have the ability to actually, again, form a defense against it, and you don't know that you're about to be attacked. So the thing about that is, oftentimes from a what we call cyber psychology and cyber warfare standpoint, a lot of negativity and a lot of counterproductive and counter-revolutionary seeding is done and embards us on a daily basis. And by doing that, when you are seeded with this type of information or seeded with this type of data from that standpoint, and you unconsciously or subconsciously carry it out, now what's being done is the cultivation of that weapon. And when that weapon is cultivated like that through the spreading of this information, because how often do people find themselves retweeting or copying and pasting a quote or a slogan or something, or a bit of information that they received, especially when it comes to something being based in just drama, and just share it and share it and share it. When you share it, what you are doing at that point is now you're taking something from cultivation, which means that it has now come from a seed to a action of germination and spreading from you. You're dealing with the harvest. And now when you're dealing with the harvest, what you're doing, you are multiplying and you are reproducing and replicating this virus, replicating this weapon unconsciously on others. And by doing that, what we do at that point is we create an entire cluster of weapons that are able to be not only just spreaded and harvested, but now reseeded into a new population or new group. And then the process starts all over again. And so oftentimes what we don't recognize is that we are setting ourselves up for victimization because of the substance or lack of substance that is actually contained within that seed. What is it? What is the seed? What is the level of life in that seed? If that seed is full of nonsense, junk, garbage, and you allow that to, again, form a harvest and then you share it and then you let it recede. Now what's happening is that individualism takes into place because of the built-in trauma factors that come along with allowing ourselves to be inundated with this type of mess, which automatically causes you to go into a survival mode. And through the survival mode, that pins person against person, survival of the fittest, a rat race, or me against them, or me against you, so to speak. But it creates a natural division. To give you just an example of that from a spontaneous operation, if someone fires a gun, most people scatter. When they scatter, that's the survival mentality that's telling you to get out the way. At that moment in time, you're not concerned about anybody else. Think about that from a psychological or a spiritual point of view. It is so embedded in our neurons and in our way of life that it does not have to be a conscious action. So what's to say that a weapon has to be consciously deployed or visually deployed against you and hit you right in your face? We associate warfare too much with simply physical war, with small arms or planes, bombs, and things like that. Keep in mind, the enemy wants you to only associate war with the physicality of war, because when you're not aware of how anything can be weaponized against you, and when you're not aware of how war can take many facets and many fronts, then you will not have a proper way to defend yourself against a weapon, because you're not aware of the application of that weapon. And so the trifecta of individualism, survival, and victimization is a very very easily deployed weapon from the standpoint of being able to embed that within again, data and data streams. One of the things I constantly urge people, and I did not put a link to this in this information, is to go back and read the archives on MK Ultra. I really suggest people go see that, because it is so much that has been experimented with from what we even knew about back in the 60s and 70s, that when you think about these operations and you think about how far from a technological standpoint the level of achievements that came out of those experiments, for anybody to think that technology, even whether we're talking about physical, mental, or spiritual, psychological technology, because technology is not just physical. From that standpoint, to think that it has not propelled and has not advanced, then you are doing your consciousness and your perception a disservice, because this is exactly what is taking place. And if we think and we're oohed and awed about what took place in the 60s and the 70s, you're really not ready for what's going on in 2023. So in closing on this one page here, when we write down our thoughts, it helps us to direct from just an idea to coordinated intention. And that's a key and powerful point. Coordinated intention to actualization of direct manifestation and empowerment. That's the important part I definitely want you to walk away with, as it applies to what the reason of talking about affirmations is, and the power of language and the power of writing things down in words. Too often as a people, we find ourselves, especially again, the weaponization of the rat race, the weaponization of stealing your time away from you, which means that when your time is stolen from you, you tend to not actually value it, because you're too busy being caught up in looking everywhere else other than the importance of time and how that's the one thing you can't get back. When your time is snatched and stolen from you, we tend to operate and write things down only as it applies to currency, or only as it applies to what we call making more money, which basically means dealing with attempting to just survive again, or live in a condition of a tangible material development, as opposed to actually dealing with self-actualization. That's why I mentioned that early on, because that's the key, is to create weapons that prevent the population from recognizing self-actualization. And by doing that, then the definition by which we live our life in what we call living gets exchanged with survival. And so therefore, people can say the word living, and in essence, what they're really doing is surviving, but to them is one and the same. They don't recognize how they've been thrown into a position of survival as a result of being on a battlefield. And so because I'm not consciously aware of the battlefield that I am deployed on, unprepared, without the proper weapons, then because of that, I do not see time as, in essence, being what's stripped from me. My being, my embodiment to actual life as being what's stripped from me. And so therefore survival and living, it can be interchanging, becomes one and the same. So the next page, without setting concrete goals that build on bringing us closer to collective empowerment, we are in fact indirectly working towards our decline. This is the same as aimlessly wondering and wishing on a star. And it's important that, and we obviously not going to get a chance to get into dive into this in today's discussion, but a lot of the music that people listen to, a lot of the music that we absorb is actually nullifying our ability to deal with critical thinking and critical consciousness. The song Wishing on a Star sits right into that. And one of my favorite ones that I like to talk about is the song Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Washing, I can't remember the actual words, but basically sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time, watching the world go by. And when you sing these things and you learn and you memorize it, and it becomes embedded in how you are, and you get to whistling it, next thing you know, what's happening to you is you are literally becoming that time waster, and it becomes a good feeling. So when we talk about the appetite for doing better, or the appetite for removing yourself from foolishness, you don't have it anymore, because your brain has been rewired for this to be a good thing, and for this to be what you're driven to like and accept as life. And so right then and there, something has been weaponized against you, and you don't even see it. So if you don't put in the collective work, you will not get a collective return, period. There is no other process of skipping basic physics when it comes to that. And we have to recognize that and see that in our life as we live our life, is how so much of what we deal with in terms of natural law cannot be avoided. The problem is especially when we take for granted basic academics and don't put that into practice as we get older, in terms of learning self, in terms of self-reflecting, in terms of really digging in and figuring out, where did my emotional state stop as my body physically aged and my mental capacity grew? What did I fill it with? Because if our emotional body was traumatized, especially when we're talking about a child, when it was traumatized, certain levels of your growth does not keep up with one another. Just because physically you may be 30 years old, don't mean emotionally, psychologically, and just your altitude for recognizing your destiny and the concept of even dealing with self-determination comes into play, that you are operating on a 30-year-old level. Because too often, most of us are trapped in a younger emotional state as a result of trauma. And so the Affirmations helps us to heal, helps us to deal with that. So now, in saying that, 3 basic types of affirmations that we want to talk about are affirmations of morality or moral, inspiration, and empowering. So this here image of Maya. Maya refers to the ancient Egyptian or Kemetic concept of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. Now, why that's important? Because when we talk about Maya, so going into that, let me just go down to the next page here. Affirmations of morality, that's what you're dealing with. And as a basic blueprint of affirmations that are historically used as a moral blueprint throughout mainstream religion, we turn to what's referred to as the 42 negative confessions of Maya. And for those that are not familiar with this will look very familiar to certain aspects of the Ten Commandments. Why? Because it was written before the Ten Commandments, and it was where those things came from. And I'm just going to say them and just keep moving, and then we'll pause right there. And again, this is affirmations of morality. And when we talk about morality from that standpoint, what we're dealing with is what allows or what standards or what operations do humans share in terms of how they associate and deal with one another on on what we call a baseline level. So number one, I have not committed sin. I honor virtue. I have not committed robbery with violence. I am peaceful. I have not stolen. I benefit with gratitude. I have not slain men or women. I affirm that all life is sacred. I have not stolen food. I respect the properties of others. I have not swindled offerings. I give offerings that are genuine. I have not stolen from God. I regard all altars with respect. I have not told lies. I live in truth. And I want to say one thing about this. And again, I really urge y'all to look at some of the references that are put at the end of the document, because when we talk about affirmations and we talk about speaking things into power, it's important that words are said certain ways. One of the things that we also talk about within our training, our Panther training, is what's called linear perception and linear learning and linear thinking, because linear deals with sequences of events that are basically fed to you in a specific order for the sake of your conscious mind associating 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. When it associates steps to be that way, then it is real easy to trick and manipulate the mind, because if I say 1, 2, you automatically subconsciously think 3. And by you thinking of what the next step is, if that next step is meant to stab you, that next step is meant to kill you, then now don't think, remember, stop thinking physically death. Stop thinking of physical death. And also recognize that when you talk about a death and you talk about poison, or you talk about something basically being fed to a population of people from the standpoint of toxicity, remember that it is all about the amount or the volume in which something is received into the system or the temple or the body within a given point. And the idea here is to weaken you to a level of survival. What a lot of times we don't recognize as a weapon as it applies to the psyche of the human being and the psyche of the masses is that, think of it like, to give you an example, think of it like the pharmaceutical industry. Most of the time, it's not meant to ever develop cures, but to develop medicines, quote unquote, and let's not even get into the word medicine, but it's meant to develop these drugs that are designed to allow you to live with the condition of sickness. So basically, we're talking about suppressants at that point. From the standpoint of suppressants, suppressants are designed to nullify your neural network connections with the end result so that you don't feel the pain, so that you don't feel the environment, so that you don't feel what you're being bombarded with. It does not resolve it. It does not cure it. It nullifies it so that you can, quote unquote, exist with this sickness and live an extended period with that sickness. Why? so that I can capitalize on your sickness and capitalize on you having a slow death in poison. Chief Quran, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to step in there on that, especially while we're on the topic of morality, because I feel like oftentimes morality in itself is weaponized against us. And you'll see that in the pseudo Christianity these days, or oftentimes people do things in the name of being just, and especially in like older texts like a Bible or something like that, where it's like I respect everyone's property, but I'm like, is that property supposed to be private in the first place? There's just levels of critical thought that I feel people kind of do away with for the sake of morality. He was resisting, so in this instance it's all good because we have video proof that so and so was right. But like, really are they?
Right. Because at that point now you have to deal with what led to that quote unquote defined confrontation, or you have to deal with the perspective in which what led to those results. And then that gets into the difference between being reactionary and being having a response to something as opposed to having a reaction to something. So again, setting you up, that goes back to the seeding process. Now, based upon the seeding process, that determines the way that weapon is then cultivated. And depending on how a weapon is cultivated is depending on how it's going to be deployed. And when I don't recognize it, then again, we're allowing it to manifest and move in and out of our spirit and our cipher, whatever ever being attacked. In fact, it just builds up momentum and becomes perpetual. And that's a whole nother aspect of talking about warfare. Let me keep moving here real quick. When I left off talking about I live in truth. And the deal is to live in truth means as your actions, you embody what truth is, and dealing with the difference between truth and going into truth, fact, falsification, and so on and so forth makes a big difference in terms of that affirmation. Number 9, I have not carried away food. I consume only my fair share. Now, when we talk about just that affirmation right there, what are we talking about? Physical food, mental food, or spiritual food? Going into the 3 elements of that trifecta that I like to get you to recognize: physical, mental, spiritual. Ingestion, food, don't simply just, and make sure you take away this from the entire conversation that I'm getting at. Oftentimes, I like to refer to things from physical because we can relate to that. But in fact, the majority of the attack that is happening to us and the majority of the way we're being worked against each other is through our mental and our spiritual essence and operation, because it is not necessarily taken in by your direct sensory input. And so because of that, we tend to look for something to just come right out and hit us, as opposed to recognizing, again, the poisoning of the body, the poisoning of the vessel, the poisoning of the mind, the poisoning of the spirit. Because once you've been subjected to so much, a certain level of poison, then just like a physical cancer, it is too late to erase it. You literally have to just take that entire chunk and remove it out. And if you think about that process from a physical standpoint right now, at least in today's current traditional practice medicine, through like practices like chemotherapy, I'm literally killing everything in that area in order to hit that small target. It's literally like dropping a nuclear bomb on a city just to kill one sniper. The point of dropping a nuclear bomb is I know I got that sniper, But because I am not technologically advanced enough in my ability to be able to stop something that has already magnified in terms of a spread, and because my system is not able to detect it, and so therefore it can replicate right along with the natural replication process of everything that is actually good for my system, then I have no choice but to eradicate everything within that given area. And when we talk about this from the standpoint of something being your system, your vessel being under attack from a spiritual or a mental capacity, that basically means the same thing. The only way to eradicate that poison seed at that point is to eradicate part of your spirit, part of your essence, part of what you are. And if you want to still survive, so to speak, or want to still stay living, or keep those three elements intact, the physical, mental, and the spiritual on the same plane. So from that standpoint, now you're dealing with a situation that it is too late to come back from. And that's not where we want to be. So when we talk about this as it applies to the collective embodiment of the people in the collective operation of the masses, we don't want to be at a point to where it is too late for us to be able to pull and come together. And so we have to recognize what actually happens to us. Again, for those people that may not have heard me in the very beginning, in terms of this document, if you want a copy of it, and I suggest everybody should have a copy of it, to put your email down in the chat, and at a later time, I'll go in and forward you a copy. Number 9, I have not carried away food. Like I said, I consume only my fair share, and think of that as not just physical food, but again, applying that to imperialism and what we deal with in the capitalist society, and even going back to what Chief Quran just talked about, privatization and what it means to privatize things. Now you have created a situation where the individual is a massive, large-scale consumer. And so therefore, everything that makes up the embodiment of who they are is built around consumption. So therefore, you will always, because of your makeup, carry away more than your fair share. And when you get the entire population doing that, and the entire population, or the majority of the population, ain't got to be complete extremes, but when you get the majority of the people operating that way, then that becomes the norm. And when it becomes the norm, then it becomes an accepted level of practice. And when it becomes an accepted level of practice, it becomes what is supposed to be practiced. And therefore, when you talk about morality, which is what we're talking about now, and importance of a morality affirmation is now from a moral human signature, it is expected that you are a consumer. And if you're not one, then you're the one that's crazy, as opposed to the masses of people. Go ahead, Chief Quran, what you got?
Just building off of that, I saw a clip the other day, and they were talking about how we have basically Stockholm syndrome with the country. Then he was saying that if your reality, you know, not like your mindset, not what you believe, not anything else, but the reality you live in requires you to go to the sink to get water and go to the store to get food, then you'll defend that to the death. But if your reality is drinking from a stream and taking fruit from the land, then you'll defend that to the death.
Yeah. And now when you talk about that, we're dealing with levels of what's referred to as domestication. And later on, we'll get into the what we call the empowerment affirmations, which will help address some of that. Let me keep moving here. Number 10, I have not cursed. I offer words of good intent. And what's important about that, people, and again, going back to definitions, and I don't mean to keep stopping, but I just want to make sure we recognize what we're up against. Curse. Look up the concept in the definition and the usage of the word curse. Too often when we think curse, we associate that with, you know, stating what's called a bad word, you know, that offends somebody. But a curse, people, really, when we're talking about speaking something into existence and manifestation, has to do with the power of language itself. When I say something that is meant to condemn someone, I am cursing them. Oftentimes, curse words or curse phrases have actually been misidentified or mislabeled as being the right thing, or should we say the what's the word I'm thinking about? The proper, so to speak, thing to say to someone. Like for instance, I would just a greeting that people would typically say when they say hello, and then you're expected to say hello back. So from that standpoint, we may be cursing each other, but because it is an accepted practice and it is an expected practice, because if I don't say the exact same words back to you and the exact same curse back to you, then you're going to find offense with it. And because I may not agree that hell is low, then from that standpoint, your conscious awareness of the cursing that you're doing doesn't necessarily have the same effect on me. But at the same time, because it is embodied in what you are in your makeup, are you open to be able to really now remove that curse from your being? And so what we have to recognize with affirmations and just words in general is the power of language as it applies to being able to subdue and suppress the knowledge and the wisdom of a population. And so when we're only associating things from a basic, what we call sixth grade level education, as it applies to memorization of things, then what happens is we can read through these affirmations. We may even be able to memorize them, but we don't embody them. We don't internalize them to the point to where we understand what's actually being said when we say it. Therefore, because of our inability to be conscious of our thoughts, then we're not going to be conscious of our actions. And if we're not conscious of our actions, then how can we have, going back to what I stated earlier, how can we ever have the ability to deal with consistent collective synchronization direct action? We can't, because that implies and requires intent, which the intent is to deal with self-determination. The intent is to deal with the embodiment of liberation as it across the individual, family, and collective, and that family unit being what draws and pulls everything to make one. This is what we mean in a higher degree when we say as Panthers, all power to the people. Now I'm off my soapbox on that. Let me read some of these. I have not closed my ears to truth. I relate in peace. Relate in peace. It's important to realize those chain of words that's being used. I have not committed adultery. I'm trustful in my relationships. I have not made anyone cry. I spread joy. I have not felt sorrow without reason. I hold purity in high esteem. And a lot of these I didn't give you, I didn't connect the additional part, but so we're just going to keep reading on, because what we deal with when we talk about this, and this is at the end of the document in the references, is what we call the negative confessions and then the positive affirmation connections to those. I have not assaulted anyone. I am not deceitful. I have not stolen anyone's land. Man, is that a powerful one right there. If we were able to just stop with that one, how how different of a world would we be in right now? I have not been an eavesdropper. Number 19, I have not falsely accused anyone. I have not been angry without reason. And being angry without reason goes into your ability to deal with self-reflection and your ability to recognize how being in a survival mode causes people to walk around mean mugging each other. And that level of mean mugging is to be expected in certain neighborhoods, because if not, you're labeled as being friendly. And when they label you as being friendly, now all of a sudden you weak and you a punk. And that goes into the lack of what we call manhood training and womanhood training that should be in existence when you deal with a people that have an intact culture. I have not seduced anyone's wife. I have not polluted myself. I have not terrorized anyone. 25. I have not disobeyed the law. I have not been excessively angry. I have not cursed God. I have not behaved with violence. 28, I have not caused disruption of peace. I have not acted hastily or without thought. That is powerful. I follow my inner guidance. We can rest on that and just let that marinate as we keep moving on. I have not overstepped my boundaries of concern. I have not exaggerated my words when speaking. I have not worked evil. I have not used evil thoughts, words, or deeds. I have not polluted the water. And when we talk about polluting the waters, don't just simply think of physical. Realize that, for instance, the word currency, which is what has been adapted to what most people refer to as money, is about the flows of water, the flows of streams. So when you pollute the water, think of polluting currency, think of polluting life force, think of polluting energy, think of polluting connections with one body to the next. I have not spoken angrily or arrogantly. I have not cursed anyone in thought, word, or deed. 37, I have not placed myself on a pedestal. Big, powerful one there. I have not stolen that which belongs to God. I have not stolen from or disrespected the deceased. I have not taken food from a child. I have not acted in adolescence. I advanced through my own abilities. 42, I have not destroyed property belonging to God. I embrace the all. That's one thing to be for us to think about, because of the way spirituality and religion has been watered down to be digestible at a 6th grade level to the masses, who are dumbed down intentionally as a population. When people read number 42 and say, I have not destroyed property belonging to God, a lot of times we don't quite get what that means. When we say God, we think of idol worship. And by thinking of idol worship, now again, you're thinking on that individual level. And because you're thinking on an individual level, now you have to give a physical reference to that idol. And by giving a physical reference to the idol, this is what gets us to start referring to those images that they implant in our psyche in order to basically degrade our self-esteem and degrade our ability to see ourselves as that's connecting with all. And so therefore, when we say I embrace the all, it covers your ability to recognize what in essence we're talking about when we say God, the all. And I'm gonna leave that alone because this is not a religious or spiritual conversation we're having. But what was important is to get you to see the standpoint of what we're talking about when we talk about affirmations of morality. So the next batch here we want to deal with is affirmations of inspiration. Now, mind you, all affirmations from this standpoint can be inspirational, but these are specifically designed to, like what we say here, motivate and produce a positive mind state. I attract abundance and wonderful things. I am surrounded by beautiful people. Nothing will stand in my way of having a productive day. I believe in myself and my ability to induce growth. And that's important when you say the ability to induce growth. I can overcome anything I put my mind to. I embrace challenges as opportunities. That is one of the most powerfulest ones we can think about and utilize and write down and post on a wall when you're a grassroots organizers, because you are going to be faced with challenges. We are attempting to undo damage that has been generationally latched to our previous generations, and aspects of that is embodied in certain parts of what we call epigenetics, dealing with DNA code. And so therefore the future generations fall into some of these elements that we need to pull back out. This is also why, not to be religious again, why they say humanity is born in sin, because of the perpetual pattern of certain things being tainted when you talk about that seeding, and how that seed Again, dealing with what the makeup is. And that goes into how the interconnection of everything is with everything else. And when you poison the water, you start affecting the way other things that have absorbed that water manifest and make themselves come up, which creates what's referred to as mutants. And those mutant genetics now pass on and become what was referred to as the norm. And so this is why it's important to recognize that. And when we talk about the ability to induce growth, I am ready to take on the world. Every day I take action and move forward in my life. Nothing will stop me from succeeding. Before I move on, anybody got any questions, comments about what we've covered so far?
No, it's just good to vocalize these. I feel like I unknowingly tell myself, you know, some of these. A lot of times I'm just like, oh, nothing will stand in my way. That's something I use a lot without even, you know, vocalizing it. But I'm definitely gonna start. So yeah, I appreciate that right there.
Cool. Go ahead, Chairman Addo.
You know, I have a lot to say, comrade, but I'm gonna hold it back. Just specifically around the positive affirmations. One thing that I found for me, you know, during my time of organizing, was I took it away from the personal affirmations and recognized that I was part of a collective and I was part of the people, and I started to use positive affirmations in a plural sense. So it is, we are going to progress.
Right.
We attract abundance. We will attract abundance and wonderful things. And that's just something that I started putting into my own mindset to be able to take it away from the individual and recognize that I am part of a collective. Like I said, I got plenty more to say, but I'll leave that toward the end and you can tell me to shut up whenever you want, comrade.
No, thank you for that, because I did intentionally change, and we'll see that on the next slide, from we to I, simply because my position and my aim of attack on this was to get people down the path of recognizing the power of affirmations. And then that's why also I referenced and went back to the idea of the trifactor. But as obviously a seasoned veteran, when we deal with this, we deal with levels of truth. And from that standpoint, in raising the consciousness of the people, we have to think in plural. We have to recognize our connection with the all. So thank you for drawing that specific distinction, because that right there is very powerful in our awareness of what we're dealing with. So with that being said, the next section here is what I did is took parts of our 10-point platform, as well as some elements from the Brown Berets platform, and just made them personal affirmations. Like, for instance, going back to what Addo just spoke on, within our 10-point platform, it says, we are gaining our freedom. We are gaining our freedom. We're speaking in that because as a collective body, we must recognize the power of the collective action. And so we have to embody that. But for the sake of getting the person to recognize the importance of affirmations and the importance of where they need to take themselves toward that embodiment of the collective, I stated here, and I switched it to the I. So I'm gaining my freedom. I promote the power of practicing self-determination and in determining the destiny of my community. That's the point number one within the Panther Party's platform is taken from that. I fight for the unity of all people, regardless of age, income, political philosophy. The National Brown Berets, point number one, states that. I continuously disregard the practice of codependency from a systemic and systematic modes of oppression. point number 2 of the platform. I promote accountability of my spending habits and practice currency and resource circulation within my community and amongst small business first and foremost. I provide an education that teaches my people true legacy and our role in present day society. Point number 5 of the platform. Having direct knowledge of self, my position in society and the world develops a proper relationship to everything else. And that kind of speaks right back to what Comrade Addo was saying. Because if we don't have knowledge of self, and we don't have knowledge of good collective self, and we don't recognize our interconnection, then we don't respect life, and we don't respect progress, and we don't respect each other, and therefore we automatically embody and embode the process of erosion in the process of dysfunctionality and the process of individuality from that standpoint. And all these things come subconsciously. All these things are a actual effect of natural law as it applies to when you create one condition, you create a staircase of impeding results from that. And so that's why it's very, very, very important that we identify the modes of attack and who the enemy is at any given moment. And when we say the enemy, don't think again of an idol. Don't think again of a person. Don't try to point a finger at a specific group of people, so to speak, but recognize how the actions of your enemy can live through you if they know how to deal with transference of that energy to cause you to defeat yourself. And therefore, now they can turn you into an agent of their doing. So they don't physically have to attack or mentally or spiritually attack anybody else anymore from that standpoint, because now you're their agent. Now you're going to do their bidding. And then when you infect somebody else, now it passes on. And so that's the problem there. Yeah, and like Dante said, it spreads the defeat through your community. Next one here. I'm establishing land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace for our people. With collective unity, I aim to fashion a liberated zone in our communities which grant our people power over the education, the economical, and the political institutions in which we direct the participation towards the purpose of defining, developing, and defending our will and divine destiny as a people. That's point number 10. And what's important about that, we started off, I mentioned to y'all that we deal with the 3Ds in terms of defining, developing, and defending. So within the platform here, or within this affirmation that you're speaking into existence, you're talking about doing just that we have direct participation towards the purpose of defining, developing, and defending, which means you have that intent again, because your actions towards moving into progression or living as opposed to survival and defeating individualism goes into the recognition of what this is. The next point here, I'm not an aggressor, but we hold steadfastly the right to self-defense. National Brown Berets model number 3. That's powerful. So again, just overall, what we're talking about here is affirmations that were taken from the 10-point platform. And my reason for exposing you to this is to recognize, for those of y'all who have not looked at the platform and program in that manner, in that light, is that it is in essence affirmations. We're telling ourselves what we're going to do, and by doing so, we're working ourselves to operating in that capacity. And that's how we should look at life from that standpoint. Affirmations of empowerment and supportive quotes. These affirmations are used to give purpose to life. I embrace the full cycle of Ujima, which goes into, again, seed, cultivation, and harvest. That's important. A leader must tend to his garden. He too plants seeds and then cultivates, cultivates, and harvests the results. Like the gardener, leader must take responsibility for what he cultivates. He must mind his work. That's the importance, recognizing that the word mind in his work means that you are minding your business, or you're doing your thing, or you're dealing with your level of accountability. Try to repel enemies, preserve what can be preserved, and eliminate what can't succeed. Powerful quote. Next one. I don't live in fear. Total liberation is my answer, period. I am the totality of the universe expressing itself through the human nervous system. I came from the source that was never born and will never die. I am here to create the world in every moment. Now, embodying an affirmation of empowerment like that helps to remove the element of fear that is injected within us, typically from birth. And is intentionally done so that we do not raise to our higher self of the higher self of development that we can operate from. The embodiment for collective freedom lives in me. All power to the people. When you are tested by life, forced to overcome adversity and think your way through the most challenging situations, you will emerge more intelligent, resourceful, and a resilient person. However, if you lead a sheltered life that insulates you from life's trials, or if you flee situations at the first sign of trouble, then you will be weak and unable to cope with the eruptions and explosions that are bound to occur, even in your carefully projected world. Adversity reveals for all to see the person you have become. Powerful. So you can see the difference in seeing that in terms of what creates the level of empowerment with those affirmations. Anything else before we move on? Because we're close to closing out. So I just want to see anybody had any more any comments or thing they wanted to bring up on what we talked about so far. Go ahead, Dante.
That last affirmation made me think of earlier when you spoke on what everyone does when they hear a gunshot in a crowd, right? They scatter, and how to be that resourceful, resilient person is like habit building, like you have to think about that moment and to mentally prepare for the moment when the gunshot goes off if you want to react in another way.
Right. And that's kind of what I meant too when I spoke earlier on the difference between being reactionary and being in having a response to something. Because when you have a response, you're dealing with the muscle memory that you trained to be able to deal with that situation without having to give it thought. And you have to have, like we started, and I keep using that word, intent on your reasoning for doing certain things the way you do it. So you have to practice intent within everything about your life. And for whatever you don't practice intent for, whatever you skip over or forget to do, just know that that leaves that gap for that to be used as a weapon against you. When I say against you, I mean your conscious actions, your conscious awareness, and your subconscious what I call your subconscious channel of connection. So it is important that we really realize just the whole process of things being weaponized, which is why I got to go back to saying why it's important to study concepts like projects, should I say, like MK Ultra and all of the other derivative projects that are preceded or came before it. But I'd say MK Ultra because there's so much information that was released on it. All right, next page. I live to serve the people. I am a revolutionary. That one, all organizers should have that on their wall, just like that. Next time you see me, I may be dead, I may be in jail, I may be anywhere. But you best believe that the last words on my lips will be, I am a revolutionary. And you have to keep on saying that. You see, that's the point of what he's speaking to. You have to keep on saying that. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill revolution. You can lock up a freedom fighter, but you can't lock up freedom fighting. And if you try, you will come up with an answer that does not answer, an explanation that does not explain, and a solution that does not solve. Powerful affirmation, powerful quotes there. Yeah, I saw you quote there, the chat there, Evan. Sweet, sweet. So that's kind of it closing the class. What I did do for those of y'all that's in San Diego, I just posted our recruitment flyer here, and so you can have some information if you were interested in joining the Black Panther Party here. And if you scan this QR code, it would just take you to a page where you can get more information about us, as well as fill out information in terms of just potentially becoming a member. And some important dates in regards to our next recruitment cycle, January the 31st, we're gonna have an interest meeting. February the 11th, application deadline for this cycle. And March the 4th is when the next recruitment cycle class begins. So again, for those that may have not been in when I've stated it the last time, leave your email in the chat and I will make sure this document gets to you. So in closing here, everyone must write down a set of affirmations that will remain visible and referenced daily in order to train your brain to embody and do what is written. These affirmations to change and revolve with you. They must serve as your self-reflective guide to fulfillment and collective accountability, by which you will fully embrace and develop into social muscle memory, going back to what Dante was talking about, for our people and generations after you. And then I just left a few links here of some things that I thought was real powerful that was stated. And oftentimes we got to look past the person saying it, but it's just when you hear certain words, certain ways, it helps create that power. So I want y'all to know that. And then also definitely, again, check out the links that deal with the aspects of spell casting in terms of word uses. And then I left the link to the 42 laws of Maya, as well as the Panther 48 YouTube channel, to where past PE classes will be listed until we modify that. And at some point here within the San Diego chapter, we will be creating a direct link to the classes that we provide here in San Diego. And then also sent, you got a link here to the National Brown Berets, because we're making sure we want to reach across and deal with all of our comrades. Anybody got any questions before we close out? All right. So I just hope everyone took away something that they can use to help empower themselves, their family, and the community, and build us, you know, again, continue to link us up and build us to higher levels of empowerment. This is what this is all about. With that being said, all power to the people.